Hello and a very warm welcome to FEM's 2020 EMEA Online Summit. I'm Claire TENNANT-SCULL, Global Director of Content and Events at FEM, and I'm your Summit Chair. This is the third of our virtual summits this year, and we're disappointed, of course, that we're unable to see everyone in person as usual, but I'm very pleased to say that I think we've got a great online event for you instead. To fit in around everyone's busy schedules, we've arranged our content across a week with just 2 to 3 sessions per day. I hope, of course, that you can join us live, but if not, you'll be able to catch up on demand. And of course, this means that you can join us from anywhere in the world and any time zone. We'll begin our summit with a really compelling story and an inspiring initiative, I think, that focuses on maximising talent beyond boundaries. Then, to set the scene for our week's deliberations, I'll be speaking with Mike WINCOTT of Air Inc. about what he sees as the 3 essentials of global mobility now. We'll continue through the week with engaging panel discussions, expert insights, and even a mobility masterclass. And we'll be covering topics ranging from health and security to immigration compliance, talent management, policy design, employee experience, and looking at some industry megatrends too. So many challenges have arisen this year, and our speakers are ready to share their practical advice with you. So please do make the most of this opportunity to learn and share. There's far too much in the agenda for me to detail here, so please do check the confirmation email that you will have received from us, or head over to our website to see the full week's programme and find out more about the stellar lineup of mobility experts taking part too. Please do post your questions in the chat function throughout the week, and our speakers will do their best to answer either during their session or in follow-up articles on our website. I do hope that you find these sessions useful and engaging. I must thank all our speakers who've so generously shared their expertise and time to prepare for this event, and it does take a lot of work, so I do want to say thank you again. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Air Inc., Alto Vita, ECA International, Equus Software, Fragaman, International SOS, Perch Peak, Santa Fe Relocation, and United Healthcare Global for both supporting this event and for being such a pleasure to work with. Now, without further delay, let's begin our opening keynote address. Hello and very warm welcome to our keynote address for the EMEA Online Summit here at FEM. I'm delighted to welcome Talent Beyond Boundaries to deliver this presentation, and I'll hand over to MARINA BRIZAR in a moment, who's got a really compelling story to tell. We're delighted that she also has some guests with her, and you'll hear from them too in a moment. I just wanted to introduce this very quickly because when I heard about this initiative, I was really impressed by it. I think it's a tremendous one, but I want to just impress on you that it is not actually circumventing the current immigration system in any way. It's a way of maximising it. So it's a way of putting its full potential to use for both the applicant and for organisations who are looking for skilled workers. I think the other thing about it is that although it's a commercially sensible thing to do, it does have wider societal benefits too. So I think it's a really interesting story, and I'm very pleased to welcome MARINA. MARINA.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's an honour to be with you all today and to present the idea of displaced talent mobility as a solution to skill shortages and employment shortages. So before I begin, I might start with a little bit about my personal background and why I'm so passionate about this project. And it starts with when I was born, and that was in Sarajevo in Bosnia. I was born shortly before the war. And spent the majority of my childhood living in a refugee camp with my mum and brothers, while my father was stuck in the siege of Sarajevo, and we did not see him for 3 or 4 years. Once we were reunited, we were offered settlement to a number of countries, but my dad chose Australia, as you can tell by the accent, and that was because he had dreams of spending days at the beach with his children. Within 6 months of arriving to Australia, my dad got a job as a telecommunications engineer at Vodafone. And I will never forget, even as a young child, him saying, if only I got a job earlier, we wouldn't have lived through refugee camps and through a siege. And that's something that's really made me passionate about the push and pull factors of migration. I qualified as an immigration lawyer, practiced for almost a decade in Australia, and through my work came across Talent Beyond Boundaries. So I'll talk a little bit more about Talent Beyond Boundaries and the solution that displaced talent mobility presents. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce human rights barrister who is multi-award winning and really a remarkable woman, to speak to us a little bit about the problem, the crisis that displaced talent mobility tries in part to solve, and can only do so with your participation. So Sangeetha, over to you to set the scene for us.
Thank you, Marina. As Marina says, I'd just like to paint a picture of what that global displacement crisis looks like today in numbers, and then explore how displaced talent mobility can solve this human rights problem and offer a unique opportunity to the private sector. Today, there are at least 80 million people around the world who have been displaced from their homes because of conflict and human rights violations. That's more than at any time since the Second World War. And nearly a third of those people have been forced to cross an international border in search of protection. So where their state is unable to safeguard their fundamental rights, a host country becomes the substitute provider of those rights. And that really is what we mean by refugee protection. But that protection is intended to last a finite period of time until refugees can return back home and rebuild their lives. Yet today, half of the world's refugees are in a protracted refugee situation. So the average length of time in refuge is 25 years. And with the causes for displacement diversifying, experts now predict environmental change, like the wildfires we've seen, water insecurities, will all be new causes for displacement. So we can expect to see all of these numbers in this picture of global displacement continue to rise. In international law, freedom of movement is a fundamental human right. Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights allows that everyone has the right of freedom of movement. But in reality, forcibly displaced people, like Marina was, have been stripped of this right because they aren't viewed as skilled or as potential economic actors. So the problem really is how we conceptualize of the concept of refuge. And displacement has long been deemed not only a problem, but one that has to be approached through a magnanimous lens of charity and compassion. But if we look at this problem dispassionately and objectively, there is a unique opportunity there. Where people are displaced for an average of 25 years, leaving them in host nations entirely dependent on aid doesn't work for them. They lose their skills, their agency, and it doesn't benefit the host nation. There's no net fiscal gain to the community and no impact or interaction with the private sector. The system doesn't work. And that is what displaced talent mobility is seeking to solve. What we need is a system where skilled, highly employable people are not rendered dependent on aid for the majority of their lives. A system which has a mechanism in which displaced individuals with skills can be identified to UK employers who need those skills. And a complementary legal pathway for skilled displaced people to exercise that human right of freedom of movement to places that want their skills. So very simply, displaced talent mobility solves the problem in the system and offers an opportunity to expand the private sector's access to a global talent pool. So it offers talented refugees with the specific skills we all identify as needing, leveraging their professional capital to secure a job and moving out of displacement with that skill and into integrated settlement, so that on arrival, they're not merely refugees, but are workers, fiscally and economically active immediately. And what that requires isn't charity or humanitarian compassion, but pragmatism and commercial pragmatism. And that's what displaced talent mobility offers to employers, and access to a much wider pool of global talent.
Thank you, Sangeetha, and it's been wonderful to work with you on understanding the immigration frameworks and the mobility frameworks in which this can fit together with our incredible colleagues at Fragment. But before we get into the details of how it works, let's talk a little bit about why TBB exists. And the simple answer is that it exists to solve part of the problem that Sangeetha has identified. So TBB was founded in about 2016 in 2 countries separately, who then came together. So co-founders Bruce Cohen and Mary Louise Cohen in the United States, who were both lawyers, attended a UNHCR breakfast where the idea of refugees being skilled was the topic of conversation. And they asked themselves, well, if there are skilled refugees, why are they not moving for work? At the same time, a businessman who has an IT background in Australia asked himself the same question. Why is it that we have perpetual skills shortages, particularly in technology, but we've got talented and skilled people sitting idle where they are not allowed to work in their professions? They then got together and Talent Beyond Boundaries was formed. A key innovation of Talent Beyond Boundaries is what we call the talent catalogue. So this was something that was funded by Barack Obama's State Department. And it saw TBB collaborating with software engineers and developers in Lebanon and Jordan to come up with an online portal where forcibly displaced people can upload information by virtue of a questionnaire to generate a really detailed CV of their skills, experience, qualifications, and language ability. We now have over 20,000 people on the talent catalogue, representing 150 occupations, from engineers to healthcare workers, from IT professionals to skills tradespeople. The talent catalogue is incredible, but it is only the tip of the iceberg. As Sangeetha said, there's 79.5 million displaced people in the world. We are working predominantly in Lebanon and Jordan, but are looking at expanding our source team and our access to forcibly displaced people into Turkey, Colombia, Peru, and Kenya. So the next question is, how does it work? And this is probably what's most important to you as global mobility professionals. And the most simple way to explain it is that it is and should be the same as any other international recruitment. So it starts with an employer identifying a skills shortage, a position that needs filling. They can then share that with Talent Beyond Boundaries or one of our partners, and we can put together a short list of candidates who meet requirements for the employer to consider. If the employer is happy or would like to interview any of these candidates, we then facilitate a remote recruitment process. Now, I will stop here and say that some of the companies we've worked with include Accenture, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and even some small regional food production companies, which is in, for example, rural Australia. So we are ready, willing, and able to facilitate remote recruitment. And this, in some cases, has been up to 7 interviews, coding tests, psychometric tests, and so on. The idea is that this remains a competitive recruitment process. If the employer is happy with a candidate and would like to extend the offer, that then triggers the immigration process. So speaking from London and in the UK, the immigration process is through the Tier 2 visa, the Tier 2 general visa. Really important point to make here is that we have been working with the UK government, and earlier this month got a commitment by the UK government in the House of Lords to explore displaced talent mobility bespoke visa options that we will test over the next 12 months. This is in response to and very similar to what's happening in Australia and Canada, where displaced talent mobility has been piloted over the last few years with tremendous results. So going back to the process, the visa is underway, the visa gets approved, then it's the mobility. Actually taking a candidate and their family out of Lebanon and Jordan into their destination country, the UK, as we are speaking about now. That involves flights, obviously some initial reception services and orientation services, for example, temporary housing and so on. But as I've mentioned before, this needs to be and should be the same as any other international assignment. Together with that is the idea of integration and how to best support displaced candidates. Now, a really important point to make here is that our candidates are skilled and going into a job, but often what happens in a family setting is that the most empowered person is required to leave within weeks of arriving into a new country, leaving perhaps a spouse and children to find their own way in their integration. And so what we ask and what we love to work with employers for is to build a community around the family. On top of the employer community, we are also working with an organisation called Reset, who work on community sponsorship programs. And that's where groups within different communities get together to welcome a forcibly displaced person. So we look at this as a completely holistic solution. The involvement of employers can be as light touch and pragmatic as possible, but it can be very involved where a community is built around the candidate through the employer. But enough talking about how this might work. I think it's now time to introduce our next two guests who we'll have in conversation. So it is my pleasure to introduce into the conversation KHALAF Abd. He is a software engineer, but also a Syrian refugee who is now living in Cheltenham in the UK. So KHALAF, do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to the UK?
Well, firstly, I will start from Syria. I graduated as software engineer from the Informatics Technology faculty at Aleppo University. When the life started to become worse and more dangerous in Syria, I was forced to leave. I hoped that maybe Lebanon was a better and safer place to live until Syria recovered again. Unfortunately, life was not easy in Lebanon, especially when the Lebanese government started to set many new restrictions for Syrians not allowing us to work or have identity documents or bank accounts or access to any service. Then I found myself working illegally. I heard about TPB from friends of mine, some of them now in Australia and others in Canada. Through TPB, they were able to leave Lebanon for work and life better. So I registered with TPB and I got a great help to improve my English skills in general. Then TPB connected me with IRIS. They gave me a good description about IRIS, which made me more excited about the opportunity. IRIS invited me to some interviews like any normal candidate. I remember I did 3 interviews and one of them was a coding, which I passed it with a good score. I was offered a job as a software engineer in Cheltenham, and when our Tier 2 visa approved in August 2019, my wife and my 2 daughters, we moved to the UK.
Thank you, KHALAF. And to reiterate, there was a humble comment there about I had a good score in the coding test. I believe KHALAF achieved a distinction, and I think that was a key reason why he was offered a position. I'd now like to throw to Charlotte Holland, who works directly with KHALAF as a program engineer, a lead at IRIS. So Charlotte, can you talk to us a little bit about IRIS's involvement with TBB and your interactions with KHALAF?
Yeah, of course. So TBB is a very important initiative to our CEO, Andrew Walsh. And I know that it's a cause very close to his heart, and it's something that he's really pioneered and kind of driven through IRIS. We have a couple of guys in Australia who initially came through TBB, and then KHALAF was the first candidate to come and join in the UK. I work directly with KHALAF on a day-to-day basis. I'm his team lead. And I guess my involvement has been kind of helping KHALAF integrate and work with the team and kind of get used to living in the UK. I think it's been a really positive thing for us to bring KHALAF in. You know, he's a really strong member of our team. And, you know, I think it really points that, you know, Andrew is driving a really great cause. And, you know, KHALAF's been a pleasure to have join us.
Fantastic. And so KHALAF has been in Cheltenham for just over a year now. It's been quite a unique time with the pandemic and working remotely. But can you reflect a little bit on KHALAF's journey and your experience and touch points with him as a manager and the skill that he's brought to the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So before KHALAF joined the team, I'd actually lost a team member to another project, and we had space in our team. And we were struggling to find good candidates to fill that position. And I was approached by my head of engineering, and he said, look, we've got a candidate that's coming in from TBB. KHALAF, you know, would you consider having him join your team? And we had a conversation, and it was around the fact that he's experienced, you know, he's been working in Lebanon and he's moving here. And I was like, great, let's bring him in. Like, let's have him join our team. We've got the space. We're struggling to find people who can fill that. And I think that KHALAF coming in has been a really positive influence for us. So KHALAF joined last August, and I think, you know, there was a kind of a bit of a settling in period, you know, when you've moved to a new country. And I think it doesn't matter where you've come from, you're moving to a new country with a different culture. So there was a lot of support in kind of helping KHALAF get settled, getting his house ready, helping him set up kind of the general, you know, bank accounts and that kind of stuff. And that had probably a little bit more support from our facilities management team. And once KHALAF was settled and he started to integrate in the team, we work in mortgages in our particular engineering team. And so KHALAF had the skill set, but obviously didn't have the kind of background knowledge of that area. So for us, it wasn't so much bringing KHALAF up to speed on his skill set, but it was just understanding how the mortgage industry works in the UK so that he can apply his technical skills to that particular product. I think KHALAF's been with us for a year now. He's fully integrated with the team. I would say, KHALAF, you're one of us at this point. We joke around, we talk about things, you know, we talk about our lives. The guys are always on hand to help KHALAF if he's got any questions, and like vice versa. We have a good joke and a laugh, and actually we just get on really well as a team. And I think KHALAF coming in is just like anybody else. He's now just part of our team, and that's worked wonderfully for us.
It's fantastic, and that's the compelling story, the story that irrespective of background, when someone is humanized and identified and recognized for their skill, it's just a matter of then bringing them into the community and into the fold. And IRIS have done that tremendously in both Australia and the UK. So we're very grateful for their pioneering work. But in terms of adapting to life in the UK, KHALAF, how has it been for you? What have you found most interesting, challenging, and how is your family doing?
Yeah, I will talking about the simple thing. Well, I have the right to leave, to work, to open a bank account. My children can go to the school, and if we get sick, we can go to the hospital. Now, my wife also studying to be a chef. All of that was not available in Lebanon. There is something like fun here. I already loved the Premier League. Even before coming to the UK, I liked Liverpool more than others, mainly because Mo Salah, I don't know. But there is something I want to mention here, that I was surprised that the people here are so serious about football, because, well, it's not easy to say I'm Liverpool fan, especially to the Man United fans.
I got a warning on my move from Australia to say soccer and football is almost more controversial than politics, so be careful who you're speaking to. And in terms of your wife's skills, KHALAF very often shares photos of his wife's cooking and has shared that with colleagues, I understand, and that's prompted a discussion about starting a catering company, and that's just one example in ways in which the opportunity for one person to move and to lead their family out of displacement just opens up opportunities for an entire family. I do want to thank KHALAF for being our pioneer, for trusting in us and believing in us, and really just embracing this as a journey. So we couldn't have done it without you. But to wrap this session up, I'd like to just ask Charlotte what you would say to employers who are considering the placement of displaced people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a very sensible thing to do. I think we've talked about this before. I'm slightly agnostic to this whole process. KHALAF joined our team, and I just couldn't praise him enough. I've been really pleased and just really very happy with the way this whole process has worked out. I mean, it's just another person who's joined our team who's had to probably learn slightly a different way of living because the culture's slightly different, but actually it's just a really great skilled person who's joined our team. And it's just been, I'm very happy that I've had the opportunity to work with KHALAF and have him join my team, because I think he's brought so much kind of interest, diversity, different viewpoints, different skill sets. He's, has created great conversation. And I think that, it's been absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's a really, really great thing to do. If you can bring someone in who is displaced, you've got someone who's generally quite motivated. I would say that about KHALAF. He's a very motivated individual, and he's very, he cares about what he does and he wants to do well. And that's a really great mindset to have in the team. So, yeah, I think it's been a really, really good thing for us to do.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your support of KHALAF, but also for your continuous advocacy and support of Talent Beyond Boundaries. Again, the pioneering employers and our champion employers have taken on the risk to mitigate the risk for others and to allow us to broaden this process. So thank you both to KHALAF and Charlotte. And I might just make a few concluding remarks. The first is to say that we have operations, as I mentioned, in destination countries of Australia, Canada, the UK. We are also actively looking at Europe as the next frontier, and that's very topical for this conversation. I think that a lot of movement starts with initial interest and conversations. So the first call to action is to reach out to Talent Beyond Boundaries if this is something that might be of interest. And the final point to make is that we are building a better working world where refugees and forcibly displaced people can move internationally to work, leveraging their own professional skills to secure their futures. As Sangeetha said in our opening, this is not charity. This is a commercial decision. It is a pragmatic decision, but it is also one where the private sector can lead in a humanitarian solution. So it is not only the right thing to do, but as Charlotte has reiterated throughout the talk, it's the smart thing to do. So We welcome your feedback, your comments, but most of all, your interest in this program, because without employers, without mobility professionals like our friends at Fragaman, this is not possible. So we invite you to be part of the solution, and that's what this is. It is a solution to skill shortages using the highly competent, skilled, motivated, reliable candidates are forcibly displaced and currently on Talent Beyond Boundaries talent catalogue. So thank you, and we hope to have an opportunity to connect with you personally and offline.
Well, thank you so much, Marina, SANGEETHA, Charlotte, and of course, KHALAF. I thought that was really interesting and so inspiring. And I think one of the key things is that you can see from that, one opportunity has the power to multiply. So I think it's given us a lot to think about. It's a fantastic way to start off our summit this year, and I'm so grateful to you all. Thank you very much again. Many thanks again to Marina, SANGEETHA, KHALAF and Charlotte for that really thought-provoking address there. So moving on to the nitty-gritty of mobility, let's hear from Mike WINCOTT of Air Inc. as he talks with me about the 3 essentials of mobility now. Hello and welcome to this Expert Insight session. My name is Claire TENNANT-SCULL. I'm the Global Director of Content and Events here at FEM, and I'm delighted to have Mike WINCOTT with me today, who's the Senior Director of Client Solutions in EMEA for Air Inc. Hello, Mike.
Hi there, Claire. Good to see you.
We're going to be talking in a quite wide-ranging discussion today, I think, about the state and the future of global mobility. But I think you've identified 3 main areas that require focus. So we talked about policy, governance, and technology. Can you just briefly outline, what you want to cover within those topics, and then we'll dig down into some more of the detail.
So, over the last 9 months or so, global mobility has been thrown into complete disarray with COVID, as everyone is well aware. We've done a lot of surveys. We've been talking to a lot of clients about the impact of that, and really there are sort of 3 main themes that have come out. First of all, there's this idea that over the last few months, global mobility has actually won itself a place at the table that it often doesn't have in terms of responding to the crisis. And the important question now is, how do you maintain that? How do you sustain that profile of global mobility within the organisation? What we've also seen is that from a cost perspective, over the last couple of years, the prioritisation of cost control has actually been decreasing in organisations through until the end of 2019. And that's really sort of been a big shift, because for the previous 10 years, since the previous crisis, there's been a lot of pressure on cost control. Of course, since COVID, that's had a big impact on the environment again for organisations, on their cost base. So cost has appeared as a primary driver for organisations. And when you start to look at trying to make sure that global mobility is effectively supporting the business in achieving those business goals and managing costs, then that brings you to these 3 areas that you mentioned: the policy, the governance, and the operationalization of global mobility, which really help to achieve those goals.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So if we're going to look at policy first, obviously there's been incredible expansion in the number and the types of policies within mobility. And obviously at the moment, the sort of the buzzword is virtual assignments. That seems to be most frequently cited. But how do you see that fitting in amongst the traditional types? And is it, do you see it really more as a sort of sticking plaster during this crisis?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, as you say, the number and type of different assignments that are now being added to the policy suite or included in the policy suite is growing continuously. You've got short-term assignments. You've got beyond them. You've got the extended business travellers. Global mobility is being increasingly asked to be responsible for any cross-border move, including normal business travel. And then at the opposite end of the scale, you've got the permanent transfers, local plus type assignments as well. So there's an increasing expansion of the range of types of mobility global mobility teams are being asked to support and to offer the businesses. To your question about virtual assignments, it's been really interesting because before the pandemic, there were murmurings here and there in the market about perhaps having a virtual assignment policy, people being able to work remotely for projects, for example, but very, very little of that actually taking place. And then we were thrown into this huge experiment, which by and large for many organizations has proved to be surprisingly successful, with people being able to work across borders through their laptops with the teaming through virtual meetings, and actually doing that pretty successfully. So that's really created the impetus for virtual assignments. To your question, is it a sticking plaster? I think certainly from the perspective of the surveying that we're doing, I think probably not, no. There are many organisations that are now at the stage of trying to create policies that are longer term policies for virtual assignments. It's not a panacea to all types of cross-border mobility. It absolutely doesn't work in many cases, but there's a small subset of assignments where a virtual assignment could well be the best way for an organisation to meet a business goal. So I think virtual assignments will be one small part of the whole in terms of the solutions, but I think it's here to stay as one of the different elements that a global mobility team can use.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's interesting what you say about it there being a murmur about it before the crisis too. I spoke to Fred Schloman, your colleague in APAC, for our APAC summit. We talked about virtual assignments at some length, but I wasn't really, even then, I wasn't really aware that it had been building for a while before this current situation.
Yeah, I think as you say, it was only a murmur, and it was very, very few companies that were looking at it. Some in the technology sector, but very, very few. But there has been this talk for years of saying, well, why can't I work remotely? And we're demonstrating it today in this conversation. And every day, as everyone is working, you can connect effectively from across borders by working remotely. So there's been that real impetus has just accelerated beyond anybody's imagination. The pace of change, and what was probably going to be a 10-year program has happened in 10 months.
Yes, I think that's very true, and I think perhaps in some situations, companies dismissed it at the start in the same way that lots of people dismissed virtual events at the start of the pandemic and all sorts of things. But we've had to adapt and change to that. So just looking at the policies as a whole, in the context of the sort of tightening economic outlook and so on, do you think that you talked about the full spectrum of policies? Do you think that needs a rethink in itself?
I think the range of different policies that companies are adding to their suite is giving the business more choice in terms of the way that talent is deployed. But I think what is important is the way that you choose which of those policies you're going to apply and for which assignments. Something that we're seeing increasingly is something we're calling sort of purposeful assignments, or purposeful decisions about who you're going to assign where and when. So absolutely, you will need some long-term assignments and to fulfill critical roles, strategic roles within the organisation. And quite honestly, those types of roles, those really critical business needs for the success and long-term growth of the organisation, may actually need a little bit more support than they're currently getting. We're seeing some companies adding back things like mobility premiums, enriching the policy to make it more amenable for people to accept an assignment, and for that the value that they're bringing to be realised for the organisation. On the flip side, there are in the past many people on long-term assignments that probably weren't necessarily needing to be on that type of approach. So looking at what's the goal of the person while they're on the assignment, and what's going to happen to them next. Are they going to go home, or is their next career step going to be in the host location as well? And if that is the case, send them on local terms straight away, rather than having an expensive expat assignment and then a localization process. So really being much more purposeful about the goals of the assignment, the purpose, the value, to make sure that you're putting the right people on the right assignment types. One of the things that we sort of often say is, if you're playing around with policy and you reduce the value of a premium by 5%, or you cut a certain allowance or a benefit, you're tinkering around the edges. Companies have done that in the last recession, the recession before that. Unfortunately, I was around the recession before that as well. So this is my fourth big recession, and there's very little left in many policies to be able to cut. So much more important is to look at the people that you're sending, and send the right people. For every one assignee that you don't send on assignments, then that's a huge saving compared with tinkering around with the policy and potentially making it unattractive for people to go on assignment. So for me, I think it's much more around making sure that you look at you purposefully design who's going on which of the assignment policies to support the business need, and only send the right people on the right policy.
So really, you're talking about casting a very critical eye over what you're doing if you're a global mobility team, say. I mean, it's extraordinary to talk about purposeful policies or purposeful relocation, really, isn't it? Because actually it should have been like that from the start. So you'd have thought.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yes, I think your point about making sure that you're identifying the right people is really important. So that really brings us on to governance, I think, and you're talking about fitness for purpose. It's a case of surely taking a longer strategic view. So you're not just looking at assignments, you're looking at retention and development further down the line.
Absolutely.
Making sure that you've got the right structures and mechanisms in place, isn't it? So that you can then evaluate the information you've got to make those sensible, purposeful decisions. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, from a governance perspective, there are many different facets to it. But first of all, there's this, as you mentioned, the link between talent and global mobility is really, really important. And one of the big challenges that the global mobility teams have is to make that connection to the talent organisation. You have to be invited to the table. You can't impose yourself on it. And to get that invitation, you need to demonstrate the value that you're going to bring. And COVID has given the opportunity to create some of those connections and to really step up to the table. As I said at the beginning, it's really about how do you sustain that. So it's really important to have some of the metrics, some of the understanding about the program and how that ties into talent agenda. And there are some great initiatives that are going on in many companies, for example, around D&I, diversity and inclusion, the number of female assignees, all of those different types of areas of focus that are really important for talent. And global mobility can bring really good insights and value to the table to help talent achieve its goals. And I think when you can start to connect talent and say, look, we can show you that 25, 35, 45% of our expat population is female, and what we need to do to be able to change the balance in the organisation, however it needs to be changed, then you can get yourself that place at the table. And that's really critical for the long-term success, because absolutely, from a governance perspective, you need to be looking at not just what the role is for the person now while they're on assignment, but what's going to happen next. Where's their career going to go from this? What's the value that's being added, so that you can ensure that the benefit of the assignment is actually being felt for the organisation in the long term.
Yes.
Just as an example, organisation that I'm working with at the moment, going through a big transformation. huge transformation from a diversified, very independent structure in each of the different countries, the regions, trying to centralize that, bring it all together.
Right.
And in order to do that, they need to get talent that is in isolated pockets of different countries and bring it together into centers of excellence, expertise, and to create global roles and global teams. Mm-hmm. So for them, really critical is that they get the knowledge into the locations where they're building those centres of expertise, but they retain it and they keep it there, or they transfer it to other individuals.
Right. Yeah.
So that's really important to make sure that they achieve that, and then that there's a clear programme of taking and sustaining that transformation through to the future and what happens once the initial 18-month programme is over.
Yes. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so to address the last point on your list, how does technology fit into all this? Because, we know that it can free teams up from doing some of the sort of admin and so on, but how can you actually utilise it in terms of making those decisions that you've talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the technology is part of the operationalization. I'll get that word right at some point. The operationalization of global mobility. So it's really important to have the infrastructure in place to be successful as a global mobility function. You've also then got to look at, well, how do you optimize the way in which global mobility can interact with the business, the HRBPs, the talent teams, and technology provides the platform to be able to get access to the information that adds value to those other stakeholders, and it helps you to be efficient in the way that you deliver the program to the expats as well, so that then the global mobility team can focus as much of its time as possible in being a value-added advisor to the organisation. So technology is something that's there to enable the successful rollout, if you like, of all the other aspects of global mobility, which are much more important, but it has to underpin that. Just as an example, I've been working on a project with a manufacturing company who have a piece of technology in place, which has given them, over the last 2 years, fantastic insights into what they're spending on their program. It's a huge program, over 1,000 assignees, and from being able to gather the information, they were able to identify to the nearest 100 euros how much they were spending on housing on a worldwide basis. And it was like 80 or 90 million euros worth of housing costs. So that's really sort of interesting to have that information, because then you can start to play around with that and focus on, if you do need to save costs, how you can do that in sensible ways. And then if you want to encourage certain types of mobility, then again, how you can use the money that you've got, use the insights that you've got to deliver a program that's much more effective in again achieving those business goals.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes. So finally, if we're going to look at all three in the round, of those three principles, which do you think is the most important at all, if that's the case, and why? Yeah.
For me, I think the most exciting area is the governance area. It's as I said, from a policy perspective, absolutely. There's lots you can do from policy. You can write your policies. You can make them more effective to meet the business goals. But ultimately, the policies they're there to support the different types of mobility that the organisation has. The technology is underpinning that, but the governance structure is where you're really making the value-add decisions about which type of assignment you're going to send somebody on. What's the value of that to the organisation? How do you make sure that value is recognised in the organisation over the longer term? So for me, that governance area, I think, is the most exciting area, and it's where you can be most impactful with the organisation in the longer term to help it achieve its business goals.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, that was really, really interesting. Thank you, Mike.
Pleasure.
Okay, speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks. Bye-bye.
So many thanks again to all our speakers and sponsors today. I hope you'll join us tomorrow and through the week for more important insights. Thank you very much.